Welcome everyone. This session of anti-corruption in progress, showcasing our BridgeGap research, ongoing research. Today we'll be talking about experiments in anti-corruption. My name is Giacomo Sillari. I'm a part of the Louis team of BridgeGap, and first talk of the day will be by Iva Parvanova. I think she doesn't really need an introduction. She's a postdoc in BridgeGap, holds a PhD from LSE, and has done incredible work for BridgeGap and aside of BridgeGap and before BridgeGap. So it's quite an impressive resume, and she will give us a talk on experiments in corruption research, a broad overview of the different kinds of experiments that we can use to better understand corruption and anti-corruption behavior. So without further ado, I give the floor to Iva. Thank you very much for your presentation, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much. If it's okay with everyone, I will remain seated because we also have a camera and this is being streamed as part of the BridgeGap seminar series. So this way we can sort of combine everyone seeing each other. Okay, so as Giacomo said, today we'll be talking about experiments. I will start with a very brief overview of what are experiments in the context of social sciences and more specifically corruption studies. The point isn't to really describe every single experimental design in detail, but sort of to map out the different types of experiments, the types of questions that they study, and why they're useful, what their strengths and limits are in different aspects. Then we'll provide some more concrete examples that are part of BridgeGap as well. So what are experiments in the context of political and social sciences overall? They serve several purposes. So firstly, they're used to test theories. So a lot of theoretical frameworks, such as the principal agent framework, the collective action models, things that you've probably heard during your course, and obviously people online use in their research. Those theories provide interesting insights into potential human behaviors, but experiments really allow us to map the true causal evidence around their hypothesis. So that can be things around sanctions, incentives, coordination games, and so on. We'll discuss this in a bit more detail further. They're also used for policy evaluations. So observational data is not very useful sometimes when trying to understand the causal impact of different policies. And experiments, different types of experiments provide a very useful tool with that. So they allow us to test and compare individuals or areas and regions that have been exposed to a certain treatment. So that can be a policy, an intervention, to those that have not been exposed to this intervention. And in this way, we can really kind of crystallize the effect of the policy without any of the measurement noise that exists otherwise. And lastly, it helps us to, experimental methods help us to, I'm so sorry, this is absolutely ridiculous, sorry. They help us recreate behavioral patterns. So not just corruption, but a lot of behaviors, we try to change them through different behavioral nudges. And in the real world, it's hard to sort of disentangle the effects of different stimuli that people are exposed to. And simulation environments, such as lab experiments, allow us to really focus on one particular thing and understand its effect on how people react in different situations. So in the context of corruption, there's two important things that really make corruption hard to study. So firstly, it's the illicit nature. So by definition, corruption is really hard to detect. It's hard to observe directly. It's often hidden. It's not well documented for obvious reasons. So that makes it hard to directly observe. And it also makes it hard to measure. I'm sure everyone here is aware or has worked on issues of measuring corruption and collecting data around corruption. So much of policy work and research is focused on perception data, which is great and useful, but it's very hard to actually draw causal inferences through it. And then also more objective measures such as, let's say, court hearings or media reports provide a great alternative, but they have a specific sample bias because really we only learn about the cases of corruptions that have been either caught or reprimanded in some way, which is not the full picture. So we don't actually have a complete sample. And this is where experiments become really useful in circumventing those. So there are two main approaches. I would say this is obviously quite reductive, but let's say we'll focus on two main approaches which are used in experimental research, and that's the principal agent theory, which again, I hope is familiar to all of you. For those online, for people online, I just want to preface the fact that in person we have a group of students, so that's who I'm mostly speaking to when looking into the distance. So the principal agent framework is based on this asymmetric information type of relationship between two agents, one principal, one agent, one delegates some tasks to another, and the idea is will the agent will there be an honest relationship between the two, or will one take advantage of their informational advantage? So the principal agent framework in the context of experiments is used to study micro, really individual level dynamics and mechanisms. It's very commonly used in what is known as lab experiments, which we will discuss later. And it allows us to really, through its theoretical hypothesis, it allows us to use game theory to model the relationships and incentives in corrupt transactions. So that can be how do different incentives affect people's likelihood of offering or accepting a bribe? How does monitoring or sanctions, how do these affect different behaviors and so on? And then on the other hand, we have collective action models, which are grounded in the dynamics of cooperation and coordination. And they're inherently connected to the idea of beliefs and norms about what other people are doing around us too, right? So if we think that everyone around us is being corrupt, the likelihood is that even if we disagree with this, we will also behave in this way, just because we have agreed that those are the rules of the society that we act in, we exist in. So this is where things like social norms, anti-corruption institutions can be used to sort of test different hypotheses and come up with some interesting insights. So this is a literature review which is based on a report which is part of BridgeGap, and it was published. I'm not sure if it's online yet, but it was published relatively recently by Professor Monti PPD, Professor Silari, and Dr. Elettra Latini, and it's on the sort of methodological principles behind corruption research. So I've summarized some of the findings that their review presented on the different findings from experimental research. So the principal agent framework, as I said, is commonly used in lab studies, and some of the things that have been tested are things like what matters, how likely it is that we're punished, or how big the punishment is, right? And things like, do we think that the punishment is an actual probable danger, or is it something that is just empty talk? So all of these things actually matter in the decision-making of people when they decide whether or not to engage in bribery, in offering and accepting bribes in controlled environments. We have found that the literature has found that size seems to be one of the most detrimental, not detrimental, one of the most important factors in deterring corruption. There's also quite a lot of work around transparency and sort of exposing how people act and what decisions they have made, and whether the potential threat of that exposure changes their decision making. And in fact, it does. There is also quite a lot of evidence around the possibility of turnover. So if you know that you are not the only public official, let's say, responsible for taking care of an entire department's procurement portfolio, for example, but there's other people, you have less leverage, let's say, in extorting companies and engaging in corrupt actions. So these types of tools have been studied in the case of principal agent theories and have been found to have some effects. There's also quite a lot of work around collective action. So that is normally things about bottom-up accountability. So things like grassroots involvement and monitoring. So rather than having a top-down monitoring system, we're talking about bottom-up monitoring. Things like, here we're talking about information campaigns. This is more about kind of raising awareness, which, depending on the context we discuss, has been found to work in some parts of the world and some sectors, but not in others. We also have things like descriptive norms messages. There's quite a lot of work that is coming out on this right now. So sort of perhaps, for various reasons, people hold the belief that the environment they're in is actually quite corrupt. But in fact, if you provide evidence to them that is able to update those beliefs, they are likely to change their behaviors and in fact also engage less in corruption. So that's a really powerful tool that is cheap to implement, very easy to spread, and can be helpful in deterring behaviors. And that is true both for the behaviors of others, but again, also about the effectiveness of law enforcement and bottom-up accountability. So we will next discuss the different types of experiments that exist in the literature that are often used to study corruption. So the most common approach to study corruption in an experimental setting is using lab experiments. So that's, again, a really controlled setting. It's normally takes place normally in a university with students or with different types of populations, but it really presents a very controlled environment. There's also something called lab in the field, which takes that controlled environment and places it in a different setting. So let's say working with public officials or representatives from a certain corporative sector or corporation. The idea is that it's not in a sort of unrealistic quote unquote environment. And then there are survey experiments, which we will discuss in quite more detail later. There are randomized controlled trials, which are considered to be the gold standard in experimental research. And then there is natural experiments. So again, what I said about lab experiments is that participants play incentivized games. So imagine for you, the students here, that you're invited to participate in a game. You sit in front of a computer, you're given instructions, you're placed in a certain type of situation, and you need to play the game. And the idea is to observe how different types of informations and monetary or non-monetary incentives might change how you act. And it's very fun to do it with students because quite often they think that, well, I'm gonna I'm going to win this game, whatever win means. I'm going to be smarter than the person who created the experiment. But in fact, that is part of the experimental design quite often, which is very fun to collect data on. Yes, so it's very good for really distilling and disentangling the effects of very specific messages or incentives and things like this. But of course, it is an artificial environment. They're often low stakes. And while it has quite good internal validity for what it is, the external validity, so kind of, blowing this into, or not blowing, but sort of moving this out into the real world and drawing conclusions about the real world is limited. What does a lab experiment look like when you start thinking about it? So this is a very typical lab game. So you normally have a firm or an individual who's trying to get something. Let's say it's a firm that's trying to get a procurement contract, right? So they can choose to offer a bribe or to not offer a bribe. Let's say if they don't offer a bribe, it's fine. Everything goes as usual. They have some sort of a, likelihood of getting the tender. It's all fine. If they offer a bribe, then there's a public official who can choose to accept the bribe or to reject it. If they reject the bribe, it's as usual, but you have lost the bribe amount. You might also get some sort of bad reputation, but that's essentially what's happening. If they accept the bribe, then there's a potential for authorities who might punish you with some sort of a probability, let's say 3%, which is not great. Or they might not punish you, and then it's a win-win for you because you have gotten the tender, most likely, and it's a win for the public official because they have gotten the bribe. So the idea here is to study what can we do to make people decide to offer bribes less often. That is really the crux of it all. Okay, so then we have survey experiments. I will not go into that much detail here because our next speaker will be talking about it more. But survey experiments can take a lot of different forms. They can test so many different things. So you can have vignettes, which represent different scenarios. You can provide this to people and see how changing just one line from that scenario affects their decision-making and the choices that they make. What's good about it is that it's cheap. It can be run on representative samples, whatever representative means to you. So again, it can be run with employees of a company, public officials, and so on. Okay, then we have field experiments or randomized controlled trials. Those are implemented in real settings. They present interventions which can be, let's say, academics or international organizations work with local governments to increase the likelihood of auditing, right? Or they make they create some sort of programs about anti-corruption champions, like within some sort of a department in the public administration. And that allows us to see how introducing it in one region, let's say, or exposing some people to this type of intervention, but not other people in another region, comparing these two regions where everything is seemingly the same apart from this one intervention, can help us understand the true effect of the intervention. So it's very policy relevant. As I said, it's the gold standard in experimental research. The problem is that because you don't simulate anything, you create an intervention, you let it be as it is, and then you collect data, let's say a year or two after, multiple times, which kind of allows you to really observe the reality of the policy in action. It's very expensive. It's very ethically questionable sometimes, depending on the interventions that you create, and it's very time consuming. So some of these interventions can take millions of dollars or euros, and they can take years and years to collect data on, design, and so on. So I wanted to very quickly give a very brief experiment. I'll run through it very quickly. One of the most famous RCTs in anti-corruption is the Benjamin Olkin experiment from Indonesia, where essentially he started looking into road building in Indonesian villages and was working with local governments. And the idea was that they realized that a lot of money was being lost, something like 30%, 25-30% of funds used in road building was being lost. And by lost, they meant that there was a gap between what was being spent and the estimated cost of what was being built based on the quality that they were testing, the length, the width of the roads, the time that it took to build, the people, all the materials used. There was still a gap in the resources. So you could argue that it was a mistake, but it was a very systemic mistake. And so they decided to introduce two different treatments across, I think, 600 villages. And one was increasing the auditing probability from 4% to 100%. So for sure, you would be audited throughout the building process. And then the other one was creating these bottom-up meetings with people working in the road building companies, with citizens, with public officials, where corruption can be discussed. So if a road is expected to be built in 2 years, but it's taking 5, citizens can go and bring up, why is this happening? So what did they found? So as I said, yes, this is how they measured corruption. What did they found? I have not summarized the results here. They found essentially that top-down auditing, so increasing the auditing likelihood by so much, reduced corruption by over 30%. Bottom-up initiatives were not as effective or at all. But an interesting finding, which kind of, can be discussed further, is that in the villages where top-down auditing was introduced to such a high extent, what happened was that the firms that were being given contracts were those that mayors and public officials, procurement, whatever officers had relations to. So they were hiring people that they knew in order to kind of mitigate the potential risk of just outright theft. And really kind of control the corruption costs. So favoritism increased, but corruption as in misuse of resources decreased. And lastly, there's natural experiments, which, the experimenter doesn't really do anything actively to collect, to kind of think of per se of the intervention, but instead you take advantage of interventions that already exist. So let's say a policy happens in one region, but not in another. A policy is introduced in some states in the US, but not others. That allows you to kind of see what the effect of the policy is by using different statistical techniques, which kind of remove all the noise, measurement noise that exists otherwise. So again, this is really good because it uses real world data and dynamics. It doesn't create this, again, simulated environment, but you have less control. There might be data issues. So for example, if you need data prior to this intervention taking place, that might not exist, which automatically means that your idea of measuring the effect of the policy would be impossible, more or less. And there are really strong assumptions that you need to make about the measurement of the effectiveness or lack thereof of the policy. So I don't have time to really go into it, but I really invite you to look at this reform from '93 here in Italy, which limited the terms of mayors. So mayors elected post-93 could only be elected for 2 terms. Those elected pre-93 could serve 2 additional terms in addition to what they served prior to the policy change. So essentially created this great cutoff point. And there's a paper which we can share with the class if anyone is interested, which looks at the effect of this policy on procurement outcomes. So obviously those mayors elected pre-93 had more time to build a relationship with companies and extract more rent. So that's one of the things that the researchers study and find some really interesting insights on the fact that longer terms actually do lead to more corruption measured as less competition in procurement. And with that, thank you. And you will hear more from me in a bit. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Iva, for your presentation. Are there any questions for Iva from the students? Hello, by the way. Good to see you again. Or, of course, from our online audience.
One question.
Yes, please.
Yes.
When you mentioned the ethical concerns in terms of this experimental style,
Yeah.
are there any cases where these ethical concerns, like, can you go more in depth into that quickly? Like, what kind of ethical concerns specifically and how they played out in the past?
Yeah, well, so this is not at all linked to corruption or political science, but do check the Stanford prison experiment. That's like the most, right. So that's like the most common ethical problematic experiment given as an example. So I won't necessarily talk about the issue of sort of the ethical issues because they're obviously quite a lot. I can share my own personal experience with trying to get an ethics approval when trying to do an experiment. So for you to do experimental research right now, you need to show that there is a sort of an objective external committee that has decided that your research will not harm in any psychological, material, or physical way the people participating in it. And in my doctoral research, I was doing experiments with, I was studying corruption in healthcare, and I wanted to do this type of an experiment that existed, that was done a few years ago, where essentially fake patients go and give gifts to doctors, trying to see how that changes their behavior, which seems very sort of not necessarily problematic, right? But you are enticing people to engage in something that is potentially problematic. And while this is a paper that has been published in a very, very good economics journal in 2012, when I was trying to do my research in 2021, that was not allowed anymore. So it's very hard to do field experiments in corruption because inevitably you're kind of trying to get people to engage with corruption in some way. Even if you're just observing it, it's still very hard to prove that you're not harming people. But yeah, no worries.
There's Bernhard from online.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Ivo, for this fantastic presentation. Really insightful and methodical. I'm Bernard. I'm part of work package 4 of the BridgeGap consortium here in Glasgow. And I'd like to follow up on one point you talked about. So basically the difference between beliefs about anti-corruption norms, right? These second-order beliefs versus first-order institutions, right? So your courts and all that stuff, you know. So is there a way to integrate these two things into a single research design and to find out what matters more? Where should we actually invest our efforts into for anti-corruption?
So do you mean the beliefs about the effectiveness of institutions and then the second order? Because second order in social norms research sometimes means what you think others like you think is right or wrong. So let's say what you were referring to is the beliefs about the institutions. So are institutions effective? And then the other one is, do I think that other people, so on a more micro level like me, are engaging in corruption? Is that what you, just checking that I
guess both of these, right? So perhaps distinguishing what types of beliefs people can hold about others, corrupt behavior, but also, of course, effectiveness of institutions. Yes.
I think one potential, I mean, in my opinion, one potential experimental approach to kind of vary these and see which one is better in deterring or changing beliefs about corruption overall is using what Massimo will be talking about in a second, and kind of doing a survey experiment where this is the only thing that you vary in a scenario. So let's say you're trying to, you're presenting a situation to people and you're trying to understand whether they agree with it or not, and you're giving them some sort of an information treatment. And is that treatment linked to sort of higher order institutional effectiveness in anti-corruption, or is it linked to sort of more societal behaviors? But yeah, I would say that would be my assumption of a good way to juxtapose these.
Yeah, sounds good. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we can move on to the next talk, which is Massimo Privitera's talk about a survey experiment, if I understand correctly. Massimo is a PhD student from Antwerp University in BridgeGap. And are you going to share your screen for slides?
Yes, you should see it now. Do you?
Fantastic.
Okay, so let's put presentation mode. So yeah, okay, let's start the timer. I'll have around 20 minutes. I'll try to be like maybe quicker to gather questions. So thanks a lot for inviting me to present this work in progress study on whistleblowing intentions and preferences through vignettes and conjoint analysis. First of all, why study whistleblowing? Whistleblowing is considered a very important anti-corruption tool. It is often like the first step in unearthing fraud, corruption, on any kind of wrongdoing, both in the private sector and the public sector. This importance is recognized by, for instance, among others, the European Commission in the Whistleblowing Directive of 2019. But the directive focuses a lot on protection for potential whistleblowers and remedies for whistleblowers whose lives have been like negatively impacted by blowing the whistle. And this remains, of course, fundamental, as it is shown by recent research. But whistleblowing, by virtue of being like a human behavior, is by nature like complex. And as such, as a complex phenomenon, should be, in my opinion, should be studied. When it comes to the theoretical approach of studying whistleblowing, there are different theories. Some of them have been mentioned by Iva before, that explain different factors impacting likelihood to blow the whistle. You have theories like addressing more certain traits at the individual level, or some like cost-benefit analysis, some rational choice. Then you have something more based on social norms or the organizational mechanisms. However, I think that what is interesting, it's trying to link together different kinds of factor and try to explain the interaction between the factor and how this impacts the intention to blow the whistle and the preferences about blowing the whistle. And the theoretical framework I'm using to do this, it's called situational action theory, SAT in short. So what is situational action theory? Situational action theory is basically a theory of crime causation that integrates person and environment-oriented explanations of crime. So you see crime repeated twice because it has actually been used mainly to study antisocial behavior. However, by digging deeper into it, I came to the conclusion that it could actually be a theory potentially explaining the causes of any moral choice. So also pro-social behavior like whistleblowing. SAT has like some key basic assumptions. These are people are route guided creatures. That is to say, they perceive their choice and execute their actions in the framework of rules that they themselves put on themselves, or that society or the organization they work in put on them. The second one is that people are the sources of their action. That is to say, this process of choice and this execution of action stems from them, but the causes of actions are actually situational. That is to say, this process of perception and this execution of action kind of depend on the interaction of some inputs at the individual and the environmental level in a specific situation. So it stresses the fact that there has to be this conjunction. And you see this like better explained in the, here a bit more graphically. So you have at the individual level some personal propensities, at the environmental level some environmental inducements, and they come together in a specific situation to cause the action. And to be a bit more specific and to translate this on my research, personal propensities are like a construct that bring together personal morals, so what people think they should do, and the ability to exercise self-control, that is to say, the ability to act on those beliefs. And if I translate this on whistleblowing, I think this can be summarized in the prosociality from the like moral level as self-efficacy, and we'll get more in depth on that later. Environmental inducements are moral norms, like societal or organizational moral norms, and enforcements. Those could be punishments and rewards, for instance, or incentives. And for whistleblowing, in my specific case, these are given by the integrity management system and then the internal whistleblowing system of the organization. So to translate this theoretical framework into an experimental setting, I'm using a survey experiment more specifically. Some information about the survey. The sample I'm dealing with is of 1,800 respondents, employees in 2 different sectors, banking and government. So I took some private sector and some public sector in Germany and Italy, and you see the hard quotas and soft quotas. Then what is the methodology I'm going to use? Let's say a blend of 3 different ones. I will have survey questions to measure the construct that I mentioned before, and this is to say this is used to profile the respondents of the survey on those dimensions. Then we'll have a scenario depicting a bribing incident, and then conjoint analysis to evaluate and model preferences of the respondents. There are 5 sections in the survey. The first one measures propensity. The second one measures the integrity context. The third one depicts a bribing incident, so a specific situation. And then the moral appraisal of the situation, and finally the preferences and intentions about blowing the whistle. So I will go through them one by one. So prosociality, as I said, is the first bit of what I think constructs personal propensity to blow the whistle. Why prosociality? Because in literature, whistleblowing is often seen as a prosocial behavior. That is to say, a behavior that is intended to benefit others, might be colleagues, the organization, or society as a whole, but that, unlike altruism, might also be motivated by, let's say, more egoistic motives, which might be a financial incentive. And I'm going to measure this. Of course, this is work in progress, so there are some methodological choices I still have to make and to carve in stone. But through this prosocial behavioral intention scale, we can discuss this maybe later if we have time, if this is the appropriate one. Then we have self-efficacy. As said, self-efficacy is the individual's belief to have the capacity to execute the behavior they think they should execute, given a certain contextual frictions and some contextual details, let's say. And to measure this, I'm going to use the general self-efficacy scale. Still thinking if maybe I should use a shorter one that has more recently been published, but not as tested as this one. Then to go to the integrity context, I'm going to use an integrity management scale that has been developed by the University of Glasgow, which is also represented here in the webinar among the audience, in case if they want to chip in later. So in work package 4, and actually there's a deliverable that has just been published about this, and you can get more information there. But just to give you an idea of what this is about, the idea is that the integrity management is not unlike any other management system, and based on some management theory, specifically Simon's 4 levels of control, the result of this system is the push and pull action of 4 different levers, 4 different levers. Belief system, which is like the ethical values that are embedded in the organization and the ethical code of the organization. Boundaries system, which are like the translation of these values into specific rules, like anti-bribery policy or whatever. Interactive systems, which are like more dialectical, is to say how these beliefs and rules are shared and discussed within the organization, and how also how some wrongdoings, for instance, are reported. And then the diagnostic system, which is basically integrity-related KPIs. The scale is currently being tested. I won't go through the scale for the moment. Then we can discuss this later, maybe. Then the vignette, the scenario. So the scenario is depicting a bribing incident. This is to say someone in the organization that is being bribed in order to give access to a certain service or whatever. But you'll see more details. When it comes to building a scenario, there are many methodological choices to make. I have made some. Still nagged about the choices being the right ones, but of course it's still ongoing, because each different scenario can convey different ethical dilemmas, biases, level of certainty, risk, plausibility, and seriousness of wrongdoings among other. And then these are actually triggered by the specific details you put in the scenario, which might be the name of the wrongdoing. The name of the wrongdoer might actually trigger certain biases about the wrongdoer. Seniority and hierarchical power might convey a certain risk involved in blowing the whistle. The source of information, a certain certainty about the wrongdoing being committed, and information about the bribe and the procedure the wrongdoer is bribed for. They convey a certain seriousness of the wrongdoing. Here on the right, you see the provisional text. We don't have time to go through it in detail, but happy to discuss it. For the moment, there is one scenario, that is to say, at first I thought to variate, especially the hierarchical power and seniority, to manipulate risk. But since I'm manipulating something else in the conjoint, for the moment, maybe that's not the case, because otherwise I would have too many manipulations. But still, that's in the air. We can still change it. Then, finally, there's conjoint analysis to measure preferences. So for those who are not knowledgeable about conjoint analysis, this is a method that is being used to assess people's preferences through their choices. But instead of rating like different factors, how much you like this, how much you don't like this, the respondents are presented with, like, say, bundles of factors, and then they choose between the two. For instance, the two options. In this case, for instance, it's a candidate, two candidates that are for hiring, and then one can choose between candidate 1 and candidate 2. And by repeated choice, a model is built of what factors impact more the choice, what levels of the factors, and so on and so forth. There are some specific metrics that are calculated. We can go more in depth on that later if we have time. So the idea is that everything we've seen before, that is to say, the constructs on propensity and environment and the specific situation, kind of impact the preferences on factors, and we'll see the factors now, or the likelihood to blow the whistle. So, as in any conjoint, the respondent will be presented with pair of profiles that randomly mix certain levels of factors. And the factors that I'll be including for the moment is still provisional, but I use the whistleblowing directive as a basis to choose many of the factors, not all of them. And the idea is to have two different levels of factors, and the minimum level is like, let's say, directive compliant, and the maximum level is going beyond the directive, because I think it is interesting to see if what is enshrined in the directive is sufficient, or based on propensity and environment, maybe we should go beyond. So there are some factors that are linked to the characteristics of the internal whistleblowing system, and most of them are linked to the risk. So, for instance, identity protection, which could be confidential or completely anonymous, or who's receiving and handling the report, and what is the time frame of the feedback that is being provided to the whistleblower. Then incentives. So, is there no incentive, or is there a significant incentive? And I'm still exploring how to make the incentive significant in this specific experiment. Then protection of third parties, because the protection is extended also to people who are related to the whistleblower, but the basic is to extend it to people who are related professionally to the whistleblower, but also the idea is that it could also cover some personal contacts, for instance. And then finally, something that is not specifically related to like technical details, but it is also interesting to see if respondents also have considerations of retributional and procedural justice. So is the person who is being whistleblown about, let's say, treated with fairness? And here I'm still exploring how this should be done. Then to finalize, there's still a bit here. Then people will be asked certain questions. First of all, they will be asked which of the two profiles they prefer, like which of the two bundles they prefer. And this is a forced choice, which sounds strange to many, but a forced choice is needed in order for the model to be built, because people have preferences, even if slightly. Then, of course, we know that in reality, people might not want to blow the whistle. So we will ask to give ratings on these profiles, and if the overall level of the rating is very low, that might mean that people are not willing to blow the whistle. But also, we could also ask directly if people would rather not report in any of these situations, or if they would report externally, because there are different kinds of whistleblowing, internal, external, and public. Here, I'm focusing more on the internal. But maybe I would want to know if this doesn't work at all for my case, and people would rather go external. Public is a totally different issue, so I won't actually touch it. Then, just to finish, I'm working on the kind of hypothesis that I could test through this experiment. There are some basic which are linked to the main effects, that is to say, to each specific factor in the conjoint. Like, to give you a small example, profiles offering full anonymity will be preferred over those offering confidentiality, and this will lead to higher likelihood to blow the whistle. And this can be repeated for any factor. And it's interesting to explore, but not that interesting, because I think the most interesting is like to the hypothesis linked to interaction. For instance, I can explore if people with high propensity and in high integrity environments are the most likely to blow the whistle, while those with low propensity and low integrity environments are least likely. Or even more interesting was the mediating role of these factors, because, for instance, the relative importance of the conjoint factors could be moderated by these constructs. For instance, people in low integrity environment and or low propensity might find those factors impinging on risk, like anonymity, more important. Then, of course, there will be hypotheses about moral appraisal and how this is moderated by the constructs. And finally, which is very interesting with conjoint analysis, how the different factors in the conjoint might actually influence each other. For instance, if the report is handled externally, which might be perceived as less risky, then maybe full anonymity is not needed, that people might be satisfied with pure confidentiality. This is, yeah, like a brief overview of what I'm working on now. Very happy to have feedback, either now or later. You can contact me at the contacts you see here on the slides. Back to you.
You could not hear the applause, but there was applause in the room.
Sorry? Okay. Thanks. There. Should I lead the questions, because I see that there's Adina first and then Monica. Who's going first?
Adina?
Yeah. Thanks, Adina.
But
Adina, we don't
we
hear you.
we can't hear you,
Yeah.
although she's not going to.
Her mic is
Okay.
not.
Okay, maybe let's go with Monica
let's-
first, while Adina, or yeah, let Monica maybe, because we don't have time. Yeah.
Hello,
And
thank
there's
you
also-
very much. It is a very, very interesting research as well. I also work with the propensity to report misconducts in organizations and with vignette analysis, hence the fascination for your topic. It's just one little observation. I see that you have a lot of different dimensions, I think from point 1 to 5, I think, within your vignette. And from my understanding, you did not do the research yet, right? You didn't do the surveys, right?
No. Still, I'm in the phase of about to pilot this specific scenario, but the data will be collected early next year, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, it's just a little feedback from personal experience with vignettes. I reached white colors, and the longer the vignette, the less answers I got. So just maybe, I don't know, you could choose less factors that
Yeah.
you want to look
Okay.
at.
No, I agree that this is important. This is important. I think I'll be piloting this too, if yeah. But the point is that, of course, as you know, in the vignette, you have to strike a balance between plausibility, risk, and I mean, in this specific case. So I kept adding nuances to make the situation certain enough, but not too certain for it to be implausible, like someone tells you straight away, or for the identity of the potential whistleblower to be disclosed. So yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll try to see if among the factors there's something I can give away. Like for instance, there's a line in which you also see these two persons meet outside, that would add to certainty, but maybe that would add like the 1 or 2 lines that would make it too boring. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, maybe you're right.
Yes,
But let's see.
That's little. Got my fingers crossed for your research, and thank you very much.
Thanks. You're welcome.
So Bernard has hands up. Are there any questions from the room as well? All right, Bernard.
Great,
please.
I can go ahead then. Yeah, thank you so much, Massimo. This is really great work. Fascinating, I think, how you sort of target that sweet spot of, having a good number of criteria in the conjoints, and that also reflects, realistically what can happen and what kind of variation there is in these integrity management systems. One thing we have tried also we have done in previous conjoints is to directly ask about these incentives as an outcome question, right? So you could ask, how much would you need to be paid in order to disclose this, right? Rather than make it a feature of the conjoint profile, right? So I have an article on that in a different context in JOP. If you're interested, I can send it to you. And if you're concerned that you might have too many or have another criterion that you would like to bring in. Equally, I would also think that the forced choice isn't that useful. I think again, I think there's potential for bias there. I would just go with the independent rating that you have foreseen anyway. But you may have certain opinions on that. So thank you.
Yeah. So using the incentive as an outcome variable, yeah, that could be an approach. However, I still think that having it in the conjoint is interesting because I might foresee an interaction with other factors. Then, of course, as I mentioned, the point is that since I'm gonna have just two levels, then the levels would be no incentives and significant incentives, which I would think in something like 2 months of your salary or something like this. I mean, in relative terms. But most probably, to make it simple, if there's a factor I'm going to exclude, maybe it's the feedback, the time frame of the feedback, because there's reason to think that makes a difference. But my hunch is that doesn't make as much of a difference as the other ones. But I'll think about also to have incentives as a outcome variable. When it comes to the forced choice, I think I imagine you're expert in that. I mean, that's the whole discussion about about it being needed to build the model. I personally think, even though I'm not, I mean, of course I studied it, but I'm not like a huge expert, but I still think that forced choice plus something else is still the best of both worlds. Even though because the point is that I could use ratings, but then if the ratings are equal for the two profiles, that doesn't help me that much. What I could do is that I could fine grain it and ask a rating which is like a scale which is big enough to reduce the likelihood of the score being exactly equal. But still, there's this risk, and so maybe I would avoid it by asking the forced choice. You're welcome.
Yeah. Any more questions from the room or online? So I have a quick question, Massimo. I enjoyed the presentation a lot. I think it's an extremely rich model that will produce a quite interesting survey where you can really pinpoint important elements in whistleblowing decisions. And I particularly like the interaction that you want to study between subjective sort of moral motivation and situational factors. I understand that the situational factors are integrity management system, presence, strength. I wonder if there's also other situational factors that might be relevant. In general, the culture of the organization. It could be an organization in which we know that wrongdoings are talked about, are sanctioned, there's gossip and so on, or an organization in which Southern Italian style. If you talk, that's not nice, right? It's not done. Do you think this could be added somehow to the
Yeah.
framework?
Yeah. So I really think it should be added. So it should be added in two ways. I could expand, like in future times, the context also to country through maybe another survey or through like sentiment analysis. But I was thinking that I could use as control variables the Eurobarometer on corruption, the latest one, which replies exactly to those questions you're asking. Like they ask, what's the perception? Well, it's perception based, but it was the perception of prevalence of corruption in the country. What is the respondents' opinion about corruption in that specific context, and also so how tolerant they are towards the specific behavior, like giving money to access public service, and third, how likely and how they see reporting on those behaviors. So it is certainly a variable that should be there. I think that Germany and Italy, I mean, you're Italian, so you might know it. Germany and Italy are kind of a two clear-cut examples. So I can defend the choice of the two countries, because if you see on those dimensions, they usually appear pretty clear-cut difference between Germany and Italy. Sometimes more surprisingly than you would expect on some dimensions. But then I thought about it. So yeah, that's more of a context that I should include. The risk I'm gonna run is that the national context actually is so let's say important that the organizational context doesn't make much of a difference. This is something that I'm thinking of now, but yeah, it could be, and also a problem maybe, but I wouldn't know how to solve this, is that what counts might be more the nationality of the respondent than the country the organization is based in. So there's stuff I can certainly add to the model. Yeah. Thanks.
Or even maybe in the vignette construction, but we don't have time to discuss. I'd like to discuss this more if possible. But thanks very much. Any more questions? All right. So we go back to Iva, who is going to talk about a specific possible lab experiment, if I understand.
Yes.
All right.
Maybe just to
okay.
preface the fact that the Anti-Corruption in Progress seminar, I think, is scheduled until 5.
Oh, that's cool.
So please, people online who are feeling satiated with experimental talk, please feel free to leave and drop off, and we'll continue. But obviously, please stay if you're still interested. Yes, I will share. So yes, 1 second. I just wanted to add, while I'm loading my slides, very quickly to the last thing that Massimo said about the country versus the sort of the institutional or whatever company or organizational setting. It's interesting that you say this because Germany scores so high on like being an anti-corruption champion in all of these perception-based surveys and so on. But then you have so many companies that are German that are sanctioned for bribery of foreign officials. So I wonder whether, the kind of the corporate mentality about permissibility of corruption will not be still quite important, even if the national one is quite corruption-free. But anyway.
Could be. It's something I have to explore. Yeah, I mean, it's something I have to explore. It might certainly be the case. the specific. Well, actually, to be honest, I hope that is to say, the more the behavior is defined by the specific organizational culture, the more interesting are my findings for the moment. So, yeah.
It'll be interesting whether the people that you're kind of testing, do they engage with business abroad as well as domestically, as well as just domestically?
Well, this I cannot control much. That is to say, also in finding the sample, it's a pretty, as it was mentioned before by the colleague, it's a pretty difficult sample to reach. So it's a sample that is as significant, as representative as possible, but being a bit flexible. So I built two scenarios, private and public, that are as relatable as possible to people in those specific subsamples. But of course, it would be perfect if I could carve a very specific scenario and just have people who work exactly on that. But the best I can do is to have someone who would find this more or less relatable. So that I wouldn't know. And also to be honest, there were some details I wanted to add to the scenario that would make it in a way maybe more interesting, which will, like, for instance, I say that the procedure they applied for is stalled for further checks, while before I was saying for further anti-money laundering checks, for instance, or before that it was suspected that the person was like a figurehead for some foreign nationals. But then I had to step back because that would add too many confounding factors. So I wouldn't know if what is actually for instance, the respondent objecting to is the bribe or the money laundering or the foreign national. So this is why I had to strike a balance. So yeah, I had to stay as realistic as possible by being as vague as possible. As vague as necessary, more as possible. Okay.
Have some time at the end to further discuss, but I think now we should go.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I will be very brief because I'm also sure that the people who are still online, thank you for being online. The people who are still in the room, I'm sure you're overwhelmed and you've had enough of experimental discussions. So anyway, so I will be talking about something that is very much still an idea, a concept of a notion of an idea that is not really fully materialized yet, but especially I would love some feedback, maybe not in the context of this session because we might not have time, but maybe later on from our colleagues from BridgeGap. So we are aiming to do a lab experiment, which will look at the relative effectiveness of different integrity management or anti-corruption mechanisms. So again, not to go through the whole thing, through the whole spiel again, but corruption is hidden. It's very hard to capture data on the true behaviors of people in the context of firms. As I've mentioned already, sanctions really represent only a small sort of subsample of the true extent of corruption out there in the world. And experiments can help us with that. So in this sort of design, our aim would be to compare two principles used to deter unethical or corrupt behavior. And that would be dual authorization, which has a plethora of names across the literature. So it can be dual authorization or the 4 eyes principle or joint decision making. It really depends on what document you're reading to kind of get the different name. And then normative communications, so social norms nudges linked to what others like you in your company do. Just to explain what the dual authorization means. Essentially, the idea is any sensitive decision has to be agreed upon by at least 2 members of a team. So this is quite often used in the sort of government side of procurement, where procurement officers cannot allocate a bid, cannot sort of select the winning bid on their own. There needs to be something called a 4 eyes principle, where at least 2 people have to agree on this decision for it to be final. So what is the motivation behind this? The idea is that bribery does not exist in a vacuum, despite the principal agent framework. It often exists in an environment, and that environment determines your final sort of choice. It's dependent on what you think your coworkers and managers might tolerate. It's dependent on what the people that you're engaging with outside of your organization will tolerate, accept, or not accept. And again, it's all about the people like us. That's the sort of the comparison group that you think of when in social norms theory, the people like you are the ones that you compare yourself to when making these decisions. So a coordination problem, the idea behind this is that you sort of adjust your behaviors based on these different environmental settings that you find yourself in. And so the specialists on integrity management are still online, so they can absolutely interrupt and tell me that my interpretation is completely off. But the 2 intervention types, as I said, that I'm interested in are social norms nudges. So that would be, in practice, things like materials about ethics training, the ethos of the company, value statements, codes of conduct, all sorts of kind of informal messages and information that is supposed to update your belief system about the company ethos in some way. And the aim of that, again, is to align beliefs with what your colleagues and managers do and approve of. And then there is the dual authorization. I kind of changed the names throughout the presentation, but again, dual authorization 4 eyes principle is the same thing, which I look at as a method of formal coordination, because you're forced to really coordinate your decision-making with other people. So there, it's not really about like, well, what do I think my colleagues are doing and let me align myself to that. You're actually put in a situation where your decision will not go through unless it matches the decisions of your colleagues. So it's much more sort of formal, for lack of a better word. And again, that means that 2 people need to decide on payments that are outgoing. In the context of a company, maybe 2 people need to decide on procurement bids that are going out, and so on. And despite the fact that it's used quite often, both on the supply and the demand side of, let's say, procurement, there's not a lot of causal evidence on its impact. There's a few experimental studies that find mixed evidence, but it's it's not very straightforward. So I kind of, yes, this is sort of the same thing. So just the main research question would be, how do these 2 mechanisms alone and in combination affect the propensity to offer a bribe? The idea, let me just kind of show you this. I will jump from slide to slide. The idea is that we want to have 4 treatments, which will be a control treatment with no messages whatsoever, normative treatment, which is just sort of a code of conduct type of intervention, 1 dual authorization with no normative messages, and 1 combination between dual authorization and normative messages. In treatment, in the control and the normative messages only treatment, the decision will very much be an individual one, with only difference being whether or not the person is given additional information about the sort of the company ethos, the tolerance of corruption or lack thereof in the company. So really sort of thinking about the game design, the chance of winning, the contract increases if you offer a bribe. So that's one consideration to have. The employee pays a personal bribe cost, and there is a chance that authorities detect the bribe and impose a fine. But that chance of detection kind of remains constant throughout all treatments. So the idea is the game structure. I realize I did not make it very clear. The game structure is that an employee has to compete for a procurement bid, and they have to decide, do they bribe or not? So the very basic lab game that I talked about in the first part of the presentation. The only difference is that prior to offering the bribe, they're given different information treatments. Again, the information treatments being normative or being told that they have to coordinate their bribe decision with someone else. So in the treatments where this formal coordination is necessary, a bribe becomes a joint decision between two employees. So your bribe only goes out if both you and your colleague have decided to offer the bribe. So the chance of winning, again, increases. A bribe cost is paid and is divided between two people, and there is still a risk of detection as in the prior treatments. If both people choose no bribe, then that's fine, there is no bribe. If only one person chooses to bribe, but the other one chooses not to bribe, then there is an automatic whistleblowing essentially going on, where the person who has chosen to bribe will face an internal penalty, and then no bribe goes off, and they have no likelihood of winning the procurement bid. So again, the idea is that this is a problem of trust. So there's quite a lot of literature on joint decision-making in cheating games. So there's quite a lot of these dice throwing. I don't know if the people online have any experience with lab experiments, but there's a lot of experiments on dice throwing and honest reporting of different or put together. They quite often tend to lie more because they feel like for whatever reason the likelihood of being caught is less compared to when they make an individual decision. So we want to test whether that is true in the context of offering a bribe. And what we want to test is whether giving people an actual information about the sort of the normative environment that they find themselves in changes this joint decision to bribe. I realized this was very sort of scattered, but it is still very scattered in my brain. So the idea was to kind of try to get some thoughts from our colleagues working on integrity management. And so what the idea would be to test, again, the decision to bribe when looking at individual versus joint decision-making, seeing whether social norms in some way affect that difference by looking at the interaction, and also just looking at social norms on their own. I have a lot more on the design, which I did not go through because we're short on time. But I would love to discuss this further with perhaps Adina and Massimo at some other time. If they have time, I can share with you some handouts, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. But yes, I will stop here. This was mostly for the people online, I think, after all. And yeah, we can take it. Yes.
Please, Adina, yes, you can write the question in the chat.
Oh, the respondents will be most likely students, just because this is a lab experiment. This is the easiest way to gather information.
Yes, so the question was who are going to
would
be
be
the
respondents?
respondents,
Yes,
the
sorry,
participants in the experiment.
Yeah. Massimo, please go for it. If you,
Yeah. So one thing is not completely clear to me is that the dual authorization process is a formal process. Is it? So it's a
Yes.
formal process that's decided by the organization they work in.
Yeah, but the idea is that we would be sort of randomly assigning people, right, to either being in an organization which has a dual authorization process,
Yep.
or one.
Yes, but what the step that is not clear to me is how the dual authorization process that's a formal procedure, even if they are signed formally, if they are assigned randomly, becomes a dual authorization process on giving the bribe. You know what I mean? Is that
Oh, well, so the dual authorization, the idea is that the procurement bid needs to go through a dual authorization, right?
Okay, because it didn't make much sense in my head. Of course, yeah. Okay.
I should have explained.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
point is that whatever happens, the outcome of their deliberation is like comes after the discussion of the two people. So the deliberation is not about giving the bribe; it's about how to participate to the tender, and then the two might decide to bribe or not. Okay,
Yes.
okay, understood.
The idea with this joint decision making in experiments normally is that it happens. So people need to decide. It's like a simultaneous one-shot decision. So the idea is that there is actually no communication between people. They just need to decide.
Okay. So there's no deliberation. Okay.
No deliberation. So the idea is you're preparing, let's say, the procurement bids on your own. Will you choose to bribe knowing that the other person might not and you would get in trouble? Or would you choose not to bribe and potentially lose on a bonus because you didn't get the bid?
It's sort of a prisoner dilemma.
Yes, in a way, yeah. So the idea is, would that be affected by presenting people with actual normative statements too about, like, company ethics and so on?
So it's not quite a prisoner's dilemma because you get an advantage to bribe if the other person bribes and not to bribe if the other person.
Yeah.
So there's a coordination element.
It's not about. Yeah.
The trust person that they will bribe in order to bribe yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So Adina mentioned something about comparing different types of students, and I think yes, that would be very interesting because there's there's a lot of sort of joint unethical decision making. So this thing, but not in the context of corruption, but in the context of just misreporting and lying and cheating in games. And different types of student populations react very differently, with economics and business students normally being the worst, like the most dishonest.
That's true.
That is always the case. Yeah.
If they have paid attention in class.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. Again, I would love to send you some more information because this is something that I've been thinking about for not a very long time. And it's something that we're working on. So it would be great to get your feedback more formally. So essentially, this will be something that we'll have to test. So on one hand, if you do multiple interactions, there are some potential issues with that, because, for example, if you bribe once, but then don't bribe other times, the person who's allocating the bids, if you're still matched with them, they could punish you for bribing the first time. There's a lot of consideration to have. This will most likely not be a multiple interaction. It will most likely be a one-shot game, because the idea would not be, or if it's a multiple interaction, would be matching you with different people. Because the idea would not be to see people building trust, but kind of elicit how they act and react to the situation that they're given, that they're presented with. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Eva, can you say more about the normative message that you're thinking?
sorry, my Zoom just died. This is where all the issues came from. Yeah, so the normative message, the idea would be to kind of mimic something like a code of conduct. So there's quite a lot of experiments for different types of professionals from different sectors. So with doctors, for example, when there's normative messages, they're often given the Hippocratic Oath before having to make decisions, potentially unethical decisions, to see whether, you know, that kind of nudges them to behave more, quote unquote, morally. I think what we would be more interested in here is seeing whether just kind of taking a very standard codes of conduct or an ethics kind of summary from a company about what we do not do, how our company is against this, how our managers are champions for integrity and transparency, something around this, would update the beliefs of people in some way about the sort of the likelihood of others to also bribe.
Yeah.
So that would be the idea, is to kind of really frame the whole thing as a company situation. So this is something else in lab experiments. The way you frame your instructions and the whole game, meaning the words that you use, do you call it a game, or do you really present the situation as a real kind of, you know, company, let's say, interaction? Do you use the wording that is relevant for corporate environments and so on? That actually has a huge effect on how people interact with the game.
So this is all super interesting, but I think we reached
Yes.
also the second limit, time limit of the evening. So thanks very much to
Thank you
Iva
all.
and Massimo.
Thank you.
And thanks for those for all who are in attendance online and in presence. See you guys soon, and have a great.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye. Thanks.